Before the first river found its way to the sea, before the first star burned its name into the darkness of space, before the first human voice rose to ask its first question, there was a presence. Not a god born from another god's prayer, not a force conjured by the fear of storms or the hope of harvest. Something else entirely. Something that had no beginning, because it was the beginning itself. His name has been spoken in more languages, in more centuries, in more corners of this earth than perhaps any other name in human history. Shiva. Today, more than 1 billion people on this planet consider Shiva to be the supreme reality, the source from which all creation flows, and the force to which all creation must one day return. He is worshipped as Mahadeva, the great god, as Nataraja, the lord of the cosmic dance, as Adiyogi, the first yogi who ever lived, as Rudra, the howler, the storm, the untamable force at the edge of the world. He is the ascetic who sits in deathly stillness on the summit of Mount Kailash, and the dancer whose rhythm sustains the universe. He is the husband of the goddess, the father of Ganesha and Kartikeya, and the hermit who has no need of family, of shelter, of anything the world can offer. He carries a trident. He wears a crescent moon in his matted hair. Around his neck, a king cobra rests as peacefully as a sleeping child. He is contradiction, made divine. But where did he come from? Who was Shiva, truly, before the temples were built, before the scriptures were written, before the first priest spoke his name in ritual fire? That is the question this documentary was made to answer, and the answer is far older and far stranger than most people know. To find the beginning of Shiva, we must travel back more than 4,000 years, to the banks of the Indus River, in what is today Pakistan, where archaeologists in the 1920s unearthed the ruins of one of the largest cities of the ancient world, Mohenjo-daro, a city of perhaps 50,000 people, with grid-planned streets, indoor plumbing, and a level of civic organization that would not be seen again in this region for another 2,000 years. These people had no name we know. They left no king lists, no war records, no great declarations of power. They simply lived for centuries in a society of extraordinary sophistication. And then, one day they were gone. Among the thousands of objects recovered from Mohenjo-daro's ruins, one small artifact has fascinated scholars for nearly a century. It is a seal, a tiny carved stone, barely 3.5 centimeters wide. Seal number 420. But it contains an image that changed everything we thought we knew about the age of Shiva. On this seal, a figure sits in perfect stillness. His legs are folded beneath him, his heels pressed together, his toes pointing downward. His arms rest lightly on his knees, thumbs outward. He wears a great horned headdress. He may have 3 faces, each looking in a different direction. Past, present, and future, perhaps. And around him, arranged as though paying court to a king, 4 animals, an elephant, a tiger, a rhinoceros, a buffalo, and at his feet, 2 deer. The archaeologist who first described this figure, Sir John Marshall, was so struck by its resemblance to the god Shiva that he gave it a name immediately. Pashupati, Lord of Animals, one of the oldest and most sacred names of Shiva. If Marshall was right, this small stone seal is the oldest known image of Shiva in human history. Carved somewhere between 2,500 and 2000 BCE, more than 4,000 years ago, before the Vedas were composed, before the Mahabharata was conceived, before the Puranas recorded his stories. Here, in the ruins of a forgotten civilization, someone pressed Shiva's image into stone and left it for us to find. Not all scholars agree that this is Shiva. The debate continues. Some argue the figure is too different from later Shiva iconography to be certain. Some suggest it could be a local deity whose traditions were absorbed into what would later become Shaivism, but even those scholars agree on the deeper truth, that the spiritual impulse that would become Shiva the ascetic seated in meditation, the Lord who commands all living creatures, the being who sits outside the world even as he governs it. That impulse was already present in the human consciousness of the Indus Valley. Shiva did not begin with the Vedas. He may be older than written history itself. Think about what that means. When the great pyramids of Egypt were still being constructed, when the first cities of Mesopotamia were learning to write their names on the banks of the Indus River, someone was already meditating on this figure, already picturing him seated in that impossible stillness, already sensing that he was the Lord of animals, of all things living and breathing and wild. The question of who first imagined Shiva may have no answer, because some presences are not imagined. Some presences are simply perceived. Around 1500 BCE, something shifted on the Indian subcontinent. The Vedic hymns, the Rigveda, the oldest surviving texts in any Indo-European language, began to take shape, and in those hymns, among the many gods praised and invoked and feared, there was a god called Rudra. Rudra. The name itself tells us everything we need to know about how the ancient Vedic people related to this force. The word comes from the Sanskrit root rud, to howl, to roar, to cry out. Some scholars say it means the brilliant one, the one who shines red like fire. Others say it means simply the wild one. All of these meanings are true. In the Rigveda, Rudra is addressed in only 3 hymns, a small presence compared to Indra, the storm king, or Agni, the god of sacred fire, who receives hundreds of hymns between them. But those 3 hymns are extraordinary, because in them the Vedic priests reveal something that sets Rudra completely apart from all the other gods they worshipped. They are afraid of him. The Vedic hymns to Rudra are not hymns of praise and celebration, they are hymns of supplication, of careful, respectful negotiation with a force that is powerful beyond all others and utterly unpredictable. The priests beg Rudra to go away. They ask him to aim his arrows somewhere else. They call him auspicious, not because they believe he is gentle, but because they hope that if they call him gentle often enough, he might become gentle. One hymn addresses him directly. Do not harm us in our children. Do not harm us in our grandchildren. Do not harm us in our lives. Do not harm us in cattle, in horses. Do not slay in your wrath our heroes, Rudra, for we always offer you rich oblations. This is not a love song to a friendly god. This is a prayer spoken by someone standing on the edge of a cliff in a storm, hoping the storm hears them. But notice something else. Even in these early hymns, Rudra is not only feared, he is also the healer. The Rigveda calls him the physician of physicians. It says he carries 1,000 remedies in his hands. It says that among all the gods, his medicine is the most potent. Destruction and healing, terror and grace, the same hands that could kill could also cure. This paradox would define Shiva for the rest of human history. As the centuries passed, Rudra grew. In the Atharva Veda and the Yajur Veda, texts composed after the Rigveda, his presence expanded dramatically. He was now known by many names: Sarva, Bhava, Nilakantha, the blue-throated one, Pashupati, Ugra, the ferocious, Mahadeva, Ishana. 8 names, 8 aspects, each one a different face of the same incomprehensible force. The Satapatha Brahmana, one of the great prose texts of the Vedic tradition, recorded all 8 names together and noted something remarkable. Each time the divine force was given a new name, it demanded a greater name still, as though this being could not be contained by any single title, as though every name humanity offered was too small. Rudra was not a god who fit comfortably into the Vedic order. He was not invited to the sacrificial fire with the other gods. He lived outside, on the boundary, in the cremation grounds and the forests and the wild places beyond the village. He was the outsider god, the god of the margins, and in that position, outside, beyond, unconstrained, something remarkable was happening. He was becoming greater than all the gods inside. Around 500 BCE, something extraordinary began to happen in the forests of ancient India. Scholars who had spent lifetimes studying the Vedic hymns began to ask a different kind of question. Not what should we sacrifice today, not which god controls the rain, but something deeper, something that had no ritual answer. What is the ultimate nature of reality? Out of that question came the Upanishads, the philosophical crown of the Vedic tradition. Texts of breathtaking depth, composed over several centuries, that shifted the entire basis of Indian spirituality. And it was in one of these texts, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, that the identification of Rudra with Shiva was stated for the very first time in writing. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad is dedicated entirely to Rudra Shiva, and it does not treat him as one god among many. It does not describe him as a storm deity to be feared or a healer to be petitioned. It calls him the supreme reality, the Brahman, the ultimate ground of all existence, wearing the form of Rudra. The text declares that Shiva is the creator of heaven and earth, that he is the witness at the heart of all things, that he is the Lord of time itself, Mahakala, the great force that swallows all ages. It says, "Know that the one Shiva, who governs every source, in whom this universe is gathered up and again dissolved, the Lord who grants grace, the one adorable one who is in the fire, the one who stands in the heart. Into him alone we enter." Do you understand what this means? In the span of roughly 1,000 years, from the earliest Vedic hymns to the Upanishads, Rudra had transformed completely. From a feared peripheral deity, a storm god addressed nervously from the edge of the ritual, to the supreme absolute, the one reality behind all realities, not a god among gods, the source from which all gods arise. How did this happen? The answer lies in something unique about Rudra's character that the Vedic people had always sensed but never quite been able to articulate. He was never domesticated, while the other Vedic gods were assigned portfolios. This one governs rain, this one governs fire, this one governs the sun. Rudra refused definition. He lived outside every boundary. He was associated with everything that existed beyond the village, beyond the ritual, beyond the comfortable categories of human civilization. And when Indian philosophy began, asking what lies beyond all categories, what cannot be defined, cannot be limited, cannot be contained by any concept, the answer pointed directly at Rudra. The god, who was always outside, was revealed in the end to be the deepest inside of all. His Shvetashvatara Upanishad also gave Shiva a name that would echo through all subsequent tradition. Mahadeva, the great god. Not great as in powerful, not great as in feared, great as in beyond the measure of greatness, beyond any standard by which greatness could be judged. But the philosophers were not the only ones exploring who Shiva truly was. In the same centuries when the Upanishads were being composed, another tradition of storytelling was taking shape. The Puranas, the ancient tales. And the Puranas did not approach Shiva through philosophy. They approached him through something far older than philosophy. They approached him through story. According to the Shiva Purana, the Linga Purana, and several other sacred texts, there came a moment, at the very beginning of this age of the cosmos, when the two greatest beings in all creation fell into conflict. Brahma, the creator, the four-faced Lord, whose lotus throne rests on the navel of Vishnu, who spoke the first syllables of the universe into being, and Vishnu, the preserver, who lies in eternal luminous sleep on the great cosmic ocean, upon whose body the very structure of the universe is sustained. These two beings, each of immeasurable power, began to argue. Who was greater? Who was the source? Who was supreme? The argument became a confrontation. The confrontation became something that shook the very foundations of the cosmos. The gods, watching from above, trembled. What would happen if these two great forces, each believing itself to be the origin of all, turned fully against each other? What would happen to creation if its creator and its preserver destroyed one another? And then, between them appeared a column of light, not a flame, not a sunrise, not any form of light that existed within the universe they both governed, an infinite pillar of blazing, radiant fire, stretching upward without end and downward without end, without beginning, without boundary, without a source that could be located anywhere. It simply was. Brahma and Vishnu forgot their argument completely. Something was here that made their argument meaningless. They looked at this column of fire and understood, wordlessly, that they were standing in the presence of something that neither of them could claim to be greater than. They made an agreement. Brahma would take the form of a swan and fly upward to find the top of this pillar. Whoever found the end of it would be declared supreme. Vishnu would take the form of a great boar, Varaha, and descend into the depths of existence to find its base. Brahma flew. For 1,000 years he flew upward, through heaven after heaven, through realms of light beyond light, and still the column burned above him without end. Vishnu descended. For 1,000 years he dove deeper, through darkness below darkness, through the roots of worlds and the floors of oceans, and still the column blazed below him without end. Finally, they returned. Vishnu returned first. He bowed to the column of light and declared honestly, "I could not find the base. Whatever this is, it is beyond me." But Brahma, in a moment of pride, in a moment of weakness that would cost him dearly, did not tell the truth. As he had been flying upward through those impossible heights, he had passed a Ketaki flower, drifting down from somewhere above, and he had asked that flower to testify falsely, to say it had seen him reach the top. Brahma stood before the column of light and said, "I have seen the summit." And then the column split open, and from within that infinite pillar of fire, a form emerged, a form that both Brahma and Vishnu recognized instantly, even though they had never seen him in this way before. Shiva, Mahadeva, and Shiva looked at Brahma, and Brahma could not meet his gaze, because Shiva sees everything. The third eye, the eye of pure consciousness, sees through every lie, every pretense, every proud claim, every mask that creatures wear before the mirror of their own ambition. Brahma had claimed to have found the summit of something that has no summit. He had tried to put a limit on the limitless. He had tried to make the infinite small enough to be conquered. Shiva spoke, "Both of you were born from me. Brahma, you have lied, and you will bear the consequence of that lie. There will be no temple built in your name, no worship offered to you among the peoples of this earth." And the Ketaki flower, the false witness, was banned from all sacred offerings forever. But then Shiva turned to Vishnu, and he said, "You spoke the truth, and for that I grant you equality with me. You are my brother. We are one reality wearing two faces." The pillar did not disappear. It settled into the earth, and it became the Dvayotirlinga, the lingam of light, the aniconic form through which Shiva has been worshipped in 12 sacred places across India ever since. This story, told in the Shiva Purana and the Linga Purana and the Vayu Purana and half a dozen other ancient texts, contains something that no amount of philosophy alone could convey. The nature of Shiva cannot be found by going up. The nature of Shiva cannot be found by going down. It cannot be found by any effort, any search, any claim of achievement. It can only be found by stopping the search entirely, by returning, by bowing, by telling the truth. The philosophers found Shiva in the idea of the Absolute. The storytellers found him in the drama of the cosmos. But there is a third tradition, one that may be the oldest of all, that found him in a very different place. Not in a text, not in a pillar of fire, but in a man sitting alone on a mountain. In the yogic tradition, the tradition of inner science that is perhaps the most sophisticated contribution India ever made to human knowledge. Shiva is not primarily a god. He is Adiyogi, the first yogi. The accounts of the yogic lineage say that more than 15,000 years ago, a being attained a state of experience so complete, so total, so beyond anything another human had ever achieved that the very nature of what it means to be alive was transformed in him. He had touched something that had no name in any language. He had gone beyond every boundary that the human system normally recognizes, beyond the body, beyond the mind, beyond even the sense of being a separate self, and found something that was not describable. Because it was everything. When this state came upon him, he could not contain it. He danced with a wildness that shook the earth, and then the dancing became so intense, so absolute, that it could no longer move, and he became utterly, completely still. For months, perhaps years, he sat in that stillness on the high peaks of the Himalayas. He was not meditating in the way a student meditates, trying to achieve something. He had already achieved everything there was to achieve. He simply was. Word spread, the way word always spreads in a world where something extraordinary has appeared. People came from great distances to see this man. Some came out of curiosity, some out of spiritual longing, some simply because they had heard that something impossible was happening on the mountain. They came, they waited, and he did not notice them. The man on the mountain was not being rude. He was not ignoring them out of pride or indifference. He simply had no awareness of the distinction between himself and the world around him. He had dissolved into the whole. There was no separate observer inside him left to notice the people waiting below. One by one, the people who had come gave up and left. They could not understand what they were seeing. It made no sense to them. They went back to their lives, but 7 men did not leave. 7 men understood, or at least sensed, that what they were witnessing was not madness and not illness. It was the highest possible state of human existence, and they wanted to know how to find it themselves. They began to prepare, not by arguing with him or demanding his attention, simply by preparing themselves, making themselves worthy of the transmission they were asking for. Day after day, week after week, month after month, season after season, they disciplined themselves completely. They were not performing for an audience. The man on the mountain still did not see them. They were preparing because they understood that to receive something infinite, the vessel must be made as clean and as open as possible. The accounts say they did this for 84 years. 84 years. Most human lives in the ancient world were not much longer than that. These 7 men gave everything, and then, one day, on the day when the sun completed its northern run and began its journey south, the moment that yogic tradition calls Dakshinayana, the man on the mountain moved. He opened his eyes, and he saw them. He looked at these 7 men, and what he saw in them moved him in a way that nothing in the outer world could. They were shining. They had become, through their years of preparation, vessels of such transparency that the very light of awareness could move through them without distortion. They were not ready to understand everything he had experienced, but they were ready enough. On the next full moon, the day that yogic tradition still observes as Guru Purnima, the day of the first guru, he turned south. This is why one of his most important forms is called Dakshinamurti, the one who faces south, the one who turned toward the human race to offer them the ultimate science. And he began to teach, not through words primarily, through transmission, through the direct communication of experience from one being to another, in ways that cannot be fully captured in any text, but also through words, through the systematic mapping of the human interior that would eventually be encoded in texts like the Shiva Sutras and the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, 112 methods by which a human being can realize the ultimate nature of what they are. After many years, the transmission was complete, and the 7 men who had waited 84 years were no longer the same men who had begun waiting. They had become fully illuminated beings. The Saptarishis, the 7 sages, celebrated and honored in Indian tradition to this day. Shiva sent them in 7 different directions, each carrying a different dimension of the science he had shared. One went to Central Asia, one to North Africa, one to South America, one to the Far East, one to the islands of the Pacific. The knowledge was seeded across the entire earth. And this is why, if you look closely at the spiritual traditions of cultures separated by entire oceans, you find the same questions being asked, the same inner technologies being used, the same maps of human consciousness being drawn. Because they all trace back, the yogic tradition says, to the same source. To one man sitting still on a mountain, to the first yogi, to Adiyogi, to Shiva, from the Pashupati seal of Mohenjo-daro, to the terrifying merciful Rudra of the Rigveda, to the supreme absolute of the Upanishads, to the infinite pillar of light of the Puranas, to the first yogi seated in enlightenment on the Himalayan peaks. The being called Shiva has taken more forms, absorbed more meanings, spoken to more dimensions of human experience than perhaps any other deity in the history of the world. And this is not an accident. It is the deepest thing about Shiva. He is the God who contains everything, including the things that cannot be contained. He is the householder and the wanderer, the destroyer and the regenerator, the ascetic who burns desire to ash, and the lover whose passion for Parvati is the very engine of creation. He is time itself, Mahakala, the great time before which every moment rises and passes, and he is also what is beyond time, Mahadeva, the great consciousness that existed before the first moment and will exist after the last. Look at his form, and you see this totality expressed in symbol. The crescent moon in his hair is time in its phases, waxing and waning, birth and death, the endless rhythm of the cosmos. The river Ganga flowing from his matted locks is the grace that descends from the highest place to sustain the world below, the mercy of the infinite toward the finite. The cobra around his neck is Vasuki, king of serpents, the symbol of primordial energy coiled and waiting. Shiva wears death as an ornament because death has no power over him. He has already been there and come back, in the deepest sense possible. The third eye, the eye of wisdom, the eye of fire, that burns on his forehead, is consciousness itself. The awareness that sees through every illusion, that cannot be deceived, that perceives the truth at the center of all things. And the ash that covers his body, Bhasma, the sacred ash of the cremation ground, the ash of everything that has ever burned and passed, he wears as a reminder that all forms are temporary, all names are temporary, all things return to ash. But Shiva is not the ash. He is the fire, and also the witness of the fire, and also the stillness that the fire burns inside. Why has this figure survived for 4,000 years, at minimum? Why, in a world that has changed beyond recognition, in a world that has overturned nearly every belief it once held, does Shiva still stand? Why do 1 billion people today still look at that ancient form and feel something that cannot be named? Perhaps because Shiva represents something that does not change, not a belief system, not a set of rules, not a promise about what happens after death, but a recognition that at the center of all things, beneath all the noise and movement and anxiety of life as a human being, there is a stillness so complete that it is not broken by anything, not by pleasure, not by pain, not by time, not by loss. And that stillness is not empty. It is the fullest thing there is. Every civilization that has ever existed has asked the same question. Is there something beneath all this? Beneath the change, beneath the loss, beneath the beauty that does not last and the pain that comes without warning, is there something that simply is? The people of Mohenjo-daro looked at that question and carved a figure into stone. Seated, still, surrounded by living creatures, lord of all animals, master of the living world but somehow outside it, untouched by it. The Vedic priests heard the question, roaring in the storm, and called it Rudra. The Upanishadic sages sat with the question in the forest until they could see that the question and the questioner were made of the same substance. The Puranic storytellers put the question into the most cosmic drama they could imagine. Two great gods searching the infinite for an end that does not exist. And the yogic tradition said, "Do not search, stop, sit, become still enough that the stillness finds you." Shiva was never born. Shiva will never die. He is the question and the answer, existing in the same moment. He is the dance that keeps the universe alive, and the stillness that the dance has never disturbed. He is the pillar of light with no top and no bottom. He is the ash and the fire and the witness of the fire. He is the first yogi who ever sat in the Himalayas and found, in the depths of his own inner silence, the thing that holds the cosmos together. Before the universe breathed, he was already here.